Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us today with Dyslexia Solutions. We have an amazing interview today that I think will bless you and give you a clear understanding of dyslexia, how to help yourself, how to help your kids. My special guest today is Ron Greer. He's a friend that I've known for about a year, and we are on Raising Expectations TV program together every few months. I'm invited as a guest on their program. But Ron is the area director for North Central Texas for Man in the Mirror Ministries. He is formerly the founder and senior pastor of Trinity Evangelical Fellowship in Madison, Wisconsin. And he's a former 18-year veteran firefighter. And it's interesting that he lost that firefighting position because he didn't compromise his faith. I'd like to learn more about that. But he's an ex-offender whose life of violence and racial hatred was transformed by the power of the Lord Jesus Christ while serving in a prison sentence as a young Marine in the United States Disciplinary Barracks. He has a tremendous bio. It would be great if you ever could reach out to him and learn more about him. But I'm going to welcome you to the stage, Ron, and we're going to talk about dyslexia.
Good morning.
Yeah, so even though Ron was not diagnosed dyslexic, like many of you out there, you see those symptoms and the signs in either yourself or your kids, and you need to be aware that there are things you can do to help with reading. So Ron, introduce a little bit more. What do you wish I would have shared with the audience that I didn't as you come on board?
Not a whole lot. I guess.
Okay.
Servant of God. I have a passion for teaching men how to be better husbands, better fathers, better servants. And because I firmly believe if we do not reach and disciple men, there's no hope for the culture or the nation. So that's my passion, and some people say it's my obsession. But it's something I've been involved in for probably 35, 40 years, primarily out of my own experience, growing up in a home where father was sort of emotionally disconnected, but in a neighborhood where fathers abandoned their homes in a few short years. And to this very day, it's one of the most violent neighborhoods in the country. Some of the highest out of wedlock birth rates and the highest incarceration rate of young men anywhere in the United States. So, but I can go back and point to and follow the timeline that when men were taken out of those homes and destroyed marriage, the neighborhood went down with it. So it's been one of my passions since then. As after God redeemed me and showed me the things that were missing, I became passionate about those things, and then He convicted me about pouring into younger men that they might pour into other young men. So that's my sort of obsession in life.
Yes, it's beautiful. And to the audience who wonder if I'm transitioning to having men in ministry on my YouTube, it's not happening intentionally. It's just that our nation is in such crisis mode right now, and I really have a passion for the broken homes and kids that are in prison. And the past two, Ron, and then the man I had last week, had gone to alcohol and violence, and Ron has a past of crime and going into prison. Now, he wasn't diagnosed dyslexic, but he had those symptoms. So Ron, talk to us about what school was like for you as a young boy, and then as you got older into high school.
School for me was torturous. I just I loved being around other kids and my friends, but I didn't like being around other kids and my friends because I was always that kid who felt like I was a little stupid or just not as smart as other kids, which led to a lot of disruptions. The other thing is there were another number of emotional issues with me, so I ended up being one of those kids who fought a lot. It just one of those things where punching someone seemed to solve the momentary problem. Unfortunately, that became a habit and the way I dealt with things. But it was usually I was suspended some ungodly amount of times. In elementary school, my parents and Mr. Herman Goldberg was the principal. They weren't first name basis because that's how often I was in his office. And I was always a kid that was disruptive or that wasn't paying attention or, made to sit in the front of the classroom, which, by the way, turned out to be a brilliant thing. And also continued the rest of my time when I even went to college. I had to sit in the front of a room, but it primarily because I didn't seem to understand things the way other kids did. There are kids who love to read. I've never been a reader, because as a kid I had language issues, and I'm sure people can hear that now, but I
No, we
stuttered.
can't hear any language issues.
But I stuttered terribly. Matter of fact, I stutter and I blink when I stuttered.
Huh.
And my nickname for kids who made fun of me was Blinky. Because and then when the country western singer came along, I can't remember what his name was, he stuttered like crazy. That was another nightmare because all of a sudden I had all these kids making fun of me because they called me that guy's name. But like that guy, later on I learned some things. But they made fun of me. And
kids can be so cruel, right?
Right. So I was never a kid that loved reading, loved books, because it just didn't work for me. And even when they were teaching reading, it still didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Wasn't clicking.
Wasn't clicking at all.
Yeah.
It wasn't all. I think phonics was the thing that I discovered as an adult when I had kids, which I wish had been a part of my childhood, Dr. Seuss and all those books for our kids. But so it was one of those torturous kind of experiences. I thought school was the worst, was the dumbest thing ever. And I actually had the audacity to tell a science teacher that when I was in junior high school. I think I was in 8th grade, end of 8th grade. I was transferred to a new school because we moved out of the ghetto into a better neighborhood, a brand new middle school. And the day I registered, my mother took me aside from my other siblings and got down in my face. And she says that if you get into any trouble here and get to fighting here, she says, I'm going to kill you. And my mother's a little crazy.
Wow.
With 7 kids and 5 boys, you didn't want to take her lightly. And I wasn't sure if she was actually serious or not, but I didn't want to chance it. So in my head as a kid, I figured the only way I was going to stay out of trouble if I didn't get around other kids. So at lunchtime, after lunch, we had this free time. I was snuck around and hid in the hallways until the lunchtime was over, and then I would go to class. Wow. And one day, the science teacher caught me trying to sneak past his door, and he called me into his room. Mr. Stewicki was his name. He called me into his room and started talking with me, let me play with all kinds of things in the classroom, and discovered things about me that I later found out were that I didn't know. So he would let me play with things in the classroom and then for some reason start talking to me. And I would talk to him, and finally after a few days got really free with my lips and my mouth. And then he asked about school, and I said I thought it was the dumbest thing ever. It didn't make sense. Why should I sit and listen to a bunch of white people all day? And so instead of him chastising me, he says, well, I think you're right. You should get out. I told him I wanted to get out of school. He said, I think you're right. You should get out of school. And he said, but if you're going to get out, you need a plan. And he duped me into doing.
Oh, good for him.
So I actually, people, it's still hard to believe, but I barely made over a C average in high school and middle school, but I graduated a year early, and I was eligible to graduate a year and a half early because Mr. Stewicki had me taking all sorts of classes and gaining extra credits. And even went to summer school 2 summers in a row. But he had me taking classes that he figured out I excelled in. Auto mechanics, woodworking, art classes, things like that I used my hands and that I could see. And it wasn't years later that they discovered that, just this weird learning style. So I got extra credits and I graduated early with my brother, and I went into the Marine Corps because I wanted to get out of the ghetto. And I started people telling me what to do. So I went in the military. So
yes, sir.
The interesting, right? But the interesting thing in the military was I didn't realize at the time, but before you go in, we took 2 sets of tests. It turns out one was an IQ test. Well, after I got to my main duty station, I got this visit from this captain from officers OCS in Quantico, Virginia. At the time, still, I was 18 years old, didn't understand it. But they had this special program back in the 70s where they were taking enlisted men and taking them OCS and making them officers, which, unbeknownst to me, was unheard of at the time. But they met with me, and one of the criteria was you have to have at least 120 IQ. Well, they had saw my test scores and said I had 123 IQ, and I qualified for this thing, but I didn't understand it. I wanted to work on planes. So I opted to work on planes instead of going to becoming an officer. But that set off a bomb in my head eventually. All of a sudden, the student who barely finished high school, who couldn't do well in reading, had 123 IQ, and they explained to me how extraordinary it was at the time. And so that started me on this sort of journey, trying to figure out, okay, if I'm not dumb, what's wrong with me?
Wow. So yeah, that triggers a couple of thoughts that I have, that listeners that regularly listen to the statistics about dyslexia, that it's 1 in 5 have dyslexia, and the kids have average to high intelligence. And that Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein, Walt Disney were all dyslexic, Steven Spielberg. There's these, there's creative minds. And I said it last week that, God gave us brain parts to work together to read, but we weren't born reading like we are seeing and hearing. But we have the brain parts that we can work together and help retrain the brain to read for those who do want to read. I look at all the beautiful books behind you.
Like to read, right?
Yeah, I laugh when I think about parents who want to take kids or grandparents want to take their grandkids to the library. And if those kids are dyslexic, that's not a fun field trip with mom or dad.
Trust me, mom and dad, it is not.
No, it's not. So the trick is getting something that's very kinesthetic, hands-on, where there's touching and the kids can see pretty colors and shapes and hear. And I'm working with my granddaughter, who's only 1, but we're bringing reading into her life to get her to enjoy it right away. And, at her age level. And I tutor some kinders, it's called TK, transitioning to kinder because they were so young. But a little girl in my home, and she's doing really well. But one-on-one is sometimes necessary to help some of those kids. And I'm not saying she's dyslexic, but we do have the red flags if the kids aren't able to learn and grow with other kids in the class. Do they just need a little bit of one-on-one? Do they need a lot of one-on-one? Are they not getting it at all? There's different levels of learning challenges and differences that kids have. So teachers and parents have to be aware. I say every home is a classroom and every parent is a teacher. So it start.
I wish that more people were out there with that message, because it's one of my sort of pet peeves as an adult and a parent. When you finally realize just how many parents weren't connected, and even with the idea that I am my child's teacher. The school helps me teach my child, but I'm the primary instructor. They hand them off, and then they wash their hands of it, and I'll see them when they get home, and they miss out on this sort of. My parents, it's the same thing, but they didn't know. They were working a job trying to provide for 7 kids. So the issues I had, they had no clue of. And when at one point in 4th grade, when someone tried to put me in a special C class, they called it back then, my mother, I still think it was probably part of her pride, but at the same time, I think she knew that I wasn't, special C student, and she wouldn't let them do it. But
I'm sorry, you said a special, like the letter C?
Yes, they call it special C.
They worked really hard to get you to that C level, is what that is?
No, it was basically, we call it, now we call it, I think my wife said they call it, kids with learning disabilities.
Oh.
Not gifted, kids
Oh,
with learning disabilities. When they give
okay,
them extra help.
okay.
These were the kids in that group. Everybody knew the special needs kids. They went
Oh,
on trips. They had little, extra stuff they did. They didn't really spend a lot of time in the classroom. They were all kids with learning disabilities.
and you got labeled a different way.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh,
And that's, I think, and I'm not sure if she fully understood at the time. She was just adamant they weren't going to put me in that class. And in her mind, you're gonna stay in your class that you're in, and you're gonna do well and learn.
good.
Which again, in my brain was torture.
What's really interesting? You're bringing to mind when I taught at a middle school. So I've taught in the classroom 10 years. And one of them was at a charter school in Los Angeles. And what sets me apart from other people with reading programs is I use music with my reading program. I play classical music in the left ear, as you know, and this app that I developed has spelling exercises in the right ear, and it's free. It's called CDSM. Audience, you can get it today for free. But I wanted to work with a student so badly that had dyslexia, and he was so good at sports, and people just loved him, but he hated reading, and he would act out, and he would sit in the beanbag chair and write his post-it notes of what he was learning as he was reading, because the teacher understood he needed a different kind of environment, the cushy beanbag chair and the post-it notes. She related so well to him, but he just didn't want that extra intervention after school. And I know I could have helped him so much more. I have another reflection of a principal of a public school, not a gosh, I've been out of that arena so long, but it's a special needs school, but it's a non-public school. And his principal said she let her students listen to music. And when I specifically shared the left ear would help retrain the brain if the kids are dyslexic, she loved hearing that, because she said, I know listening to music will calm them down and they can work. So,
oh, well.
So tell us about how you hum and
I'm sorry.
I said, go ahead and tell us about how you hum and sing.
I do. Now again, it drives my wife crazy sometimes, and a lot of times it doesn't bother at all. But there are just times it kind of gets on her nerves because I'm whistling, humming, or she says mummering, because I'm sort of singing and mumbling my words out, and she'll say, "Would you sing this song or stop?" One of the two. But it's and I don't know how to explain it. And I've told people before, there is always music in my head. Always. I don't play a musical instrument, but I sing. I've been in choirs and in quartets and that sort of thing. I always sing. I've been told that I even sometimes, some people talk in their sleep. I'll do this weird singing thing. But it's always in my head. And when I concentrate, I have a tendency to hum or whistle when I'm concentrating. Now it didn't do too well. I mean, it didn't fare well in college.
Yeah.
Around other people.
Yes.
But I have to intentionally, discipline myself or tell myself not to hum or sing if I'm in an environment where people are reading, or if I'm in a testing environment or something like that. I have to keep myself not from doing it out loud, but it's still in my head. And
it's so interesting.
Well, somehow back when, I don't know how I stumbled upon it, but I had at one point assigned this, I guess a woman, I'd now be a speech therapist or something, back in school, and she was trying to help me with my lisp, she called it, or something.
Yes.
Part of that was getting me to slow down, right? So that's right. She had me that built this cadence. And then so when I talk, I was supposed to have this cadence in my head. Somehow music at the time was one of the things that I liked, and that sort of became this sort of kind of a tool. I don't know if that sounds weird or not.
Well, but one of the kings did that. I have to remember what king he was, but he was a stuttering king, King Richard, I think.
Yeah, the England. Yes. I remember seeing the movie. Yes.
Yeah, and so they would play music in the background, or let him listen to music where he could give his speech.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when I became a preacher, I told people in my call to ministry, he always had these faces like, oh, bless his heart. Because, and I knew it in people's faces, and there was a guy who was mentoring me at the time. But that was one of the things that also, because in their minds, how are you going to do that? And so when I first started speaking, I took a public speaking course, and part of what I did there was use sort of music as a cadence for speaking as well.
Wow.
So it became this, and it's still there in my head. I another I guess sort of quirk. So when I was got in the Marine Corps boot camp, after boot camp you go to your school. I went to what they call A school. So I qualified to be a hydraulic technician for fighter jets, which is also beyond me at the time. But so we got to the school in Middleton, Tennessee. The first day of class, the instructor explains to you that about 80% of you guys are going to wash out before this is over with. It's a 3-month course. And of course, and in order to abate that, they had these required study groups. You have to be in a study group, and you have to meet a couple of times a week in the barracks, and you can't miss them. And there's a quiz every Friday. Now, if you fail, I think 2 quizzes in a row, the third quiz, you get kicked out. Well, I got in trouble after about the 3rd week, because instead of going to the barracks after eating chow, I go to the club and hang out.
To hear
And
music.
and yeah, it was. They always had the great bands, and it was disco and
Uh-huh.
70s. But they eventually informed the instructor, and who they called me into the officer's office, and they were going to discipline me. But the problem is, my scores are 85 and 90 on each one of the quizzes, and we had our little section exam, and I got like a 95. So they couldn't understand how I was getting the scores if I wasn't studying, and I wasn't. And the guys themselves, they were struggling.
Wow.
But to me, it was easy. Now here's the
Isn't that
problem.
neat?
Well, what made it easy was they take an entire F-4 Phantom jet, and all the components and everything were on the wall, around the walls in the classroom. Well, each time they're talking about something, they would go to one section on the wall. I could touch it, I could see it. It made perfect sense.
Beautiful. Yeah.
It drove them crazy. Okay? So I would go back to my barracks when I did go over stuff. I had a stereo system. I put in my Earth, Wind, and Fire or something, and I would go through. But it worked for me. It's just my learning style. And when I got to college, I found I had to go to college in order to work on aircraft. I went to engineering school and picked, unknown to me, one of the best in the country.
Good.
And one of the things I did was I got a personal recorder, General Electric just made, and I talked to each professor and explained to them I had a problem learning, and I wanted them to wear the recorder, so when I got back to the dorm at night, I could go back over and listen to it, because I can't listen and take notes at the same time. I still can't do it. So they would do that, except one professor, a college professor, Mr. Kufertig, said no.
Busted.
He was the most animated, cartoonish looking person I've ever met. And watching him in my math class was like watching the Nutty Professor Donald Duck from a cartoon. And I got an A in his class. He never recorded a single thing. So I don't know. It's just visual thing. I'm a visual learner. If there's a rhythm to something, I do well. But reading something, I literally have about a 10-minute attention span, and then my brain goes off. I read stuff. I have to pace myself. Yeah. Because I'll read something, I read ahead or I read back or something. I have to be very particular and very intentional about when I'm reading something, which is very embarrassing when you're standing in front of 1,000 people in a pulpit and you mix up words in a passage.
Well, you're saying a lot that I think will resonate with people. When people listen to music, the science shows that it does something in the brain, that anticipation, because you know what's next. And it really helps kids with wandering attention with ADHD. If they can have we've learned that music in the background is helpful for, I would say 99% of the students in a classroom will like it. You'll always have one that says, I don't want to hear music. But listening to it in the left ear while you're studying or reading or watching the news or something, it has a different effect on the brain. I had a middle school student that announced to everybody he was adopted, he had dyslexia, and he had ADHD. And he would say, I listen, he said, the Ritalin calms me down, but the music helps me learn. So that's when they use Ritalin. I don't know how many people try to get away from it. Now people are trying to eat healthier. But Ron, to wrap this up, why don't you, what would be some closing words you'd like to share with the parents today? And maybe they will be dyslexic, undiagnosed.
I would tell parents, be engaged and be involved with your child. You are your child's primary caretaker, but you're also their primary teacher. Schools and teachers are in essence your helpers. It's not their job and their responsibility, it is yours. No one knows your child the way you do. There are some things you intuitively know about your son or daughter that no one else is able to figure out. So it makes you keenly equipped and able to intervene on their part. And I have to say, with 3 kids and grandkids, don't be ashamed that somehow if your child is different or they don't, sort of learn the way you did or act the way you did, listen, study them and find out what it is that causes them, the click. How do they learn? What appeals to them, what doesn't appeal to them. And even with 3 sons, you find out that all 3 of them are completely different. So there's no one size fits all. And you're also your kid's best and only real advocate. Public schools and even private schools, I'm sorry, your son or daughter isn't their number one priority, even though they say that, right? It's a business, it's an institution. So the institution and the survival comes first, your child comes second. God has provided you, though, however, to be that number one primary advocate for your child. So
what about that household where the parents are both busy working or and there's not a whole lot of time to hang out with the kids? How would you urge them to make time for their kids?
I would say make that a priority. So the time that you do have with them, focus on them, be present. One of the things that we constantly kind of drill into men and fathers, be present. When you come home, if you have an hour, which is probably about generous for most people, focus on your child, not the television, not the newspaper, not your mom discussing things. Your mom can discuss issues after the kids go to bed. Set aside an hour for that, but focus on your kids, be present in their lives. It pays dividends that beyond your imagination. That 1 hour or 30 minutes, it's not going to kill you. It's not going to destroy your business. It's not going to destroy your job if you take that hour. So focus on your kids, be present in their lives. And the other thing it does, it tells a child that they're valuable to you. If they're valued to you, it builds their confidence. It builds their tenacity. They feel they can conquer the world if dad and mom know that I'm valuable and valuable to them. You're the primary, right, in their environment.
And it starts young. It starts young, and when the kids when the kids reach middle school and then high school, that foundation is built when they're established when they're young. And then as they get older, the hormones kick in and the peer influence is so strong. But parents, you got to still stay connected with your kids. And it's nice if there's a 2-parent household that can just, I would defer to my husband often when my son wasn't listening to me. We had that privilege and blessing, but it gets a little tricky.
But even with single parents, again, I grew up in an urban area. That became a lot of single mothers, and most of my relatives, single mothers at home. But I tell my nieces and nephews the same thing. Listen, I know you have a lot going on. I know being a single mother with 1, 2, and 3 kids. I sometimes hard to imagine, but even there, it's sacrifice something in your day to focus on your kids. If it's fixing a quick meal, something quick and easy, in order to give you a half hour to your kids, then do that. Sometimes they get caught up in trying to make sure everything gets cleaned up and straightened up. You know what? Sacrifice. A disorganized house has never killed anyone. It's never destroyed any child. Okay. So take the time to be present and to connect with your kids. And so that you learn them, study them to find out who they are and how they tick, so that you can help them. It will pay off dividends beyond your imagination long after they're gone from your household.
Those are good words. Well, let the audience know. I'll put some information in the text how they can reach you. But for those who want to hear and write it down, what's the best way for them to reach you, Ron?
They can reach me at Ron Greer. Well, I'll put it at, let's go to the ministry website. Get maninthemmirror.org/Ron Greer. They can get a bio there, contact information, and even just a simple link to click and go and send them right to my email box. You can also call me or text me at area code 407-455-1690.
Okay.
I get a lot of marketing calls, but I'm one of those guys that answer before I click off.
Okay, that's great.
If I don't recognize the number, I'll still answer it. But the best way to reach me is by text or by email.
Okay, Ron, thank you so much. I appreciate Rosalind being a supportive wife to what God's calling you to do as well. You've given us a wealth of information, and I know the audience will really love it. So I'm going to end by giving a little promo of my 3 books that I have written talking about music. One is A Message of Hope, how music enhances reading for dyslexic children. One is Prisms of Brilliance. We want to get literacy into the prisons and get all the prisoners reading. And we have Dyslexia as a Trait of Genius. So all 3 of those books have a different emphasis, and you can find them on Amazon. I hope you reach out. I also have curriculum available, and I also have a free app now, CDSM. So you can reach me at dyslexia-solutions.com. Schedule a 15-minute free consultation. I'd love to talk to you. And I appreciate you tuning in today. Until next week, may God bless you. Have a great week.
God bless you. Thank you.